This episode is brought to you by Sterling Soap Company. How often do you think about your soap? Well, if you answered, not much, maybe you should. You see, a lot of what passes for soap in stores is technically not soap, according to the FDA's definition. It's full of lab-created chemicals and detergents because, well, it's cheaper to make. Now, what if you could buy natural soap made from natural ingredients like tallow, palm oil, coconut oil, and scented with essential oils, and for just a little more than you'd pay for grocery store soap? Sterling Soap is 100% natural, and with a wide variety of bath soaps, shave soaps, beard balm, lotions, and cologne, there's a product and a scent for just about everybody. Check them out for yourself at sterlingsoap.com. That's STIRLING soap.com. Are you a hockey fan? Then you'll love Eric Zweig's new book, Hockey Hall of Fame True Stories 2. It's a treasure trove of untold tales, bizarre incidents, and captivating trivia that will leave even the most devoted puckhead astounded. The intense rivalries, epic showdowns, and historic clashes that shaped the NHL's early years, it's all in there. Zweig uncovers the true stories that helped shape the sport, ensuring that you will never look at hockey the same way again. Check out Hockey Hall of Fame True Stories 2 on Amazon or wherever fine books are sold. And welcome back to This Day in Sports History, a member of the Sports History Network. You can find more info and more podcasts at sportshistorynetwork.com. It's August 7th, and on this day in 1954, it was the Mile of the Century race featuring Roger Bannister and John Landy. 70 years ago on this date, it was one of the most anticipated foot races in the history of man. Now listen, I can go a little heavy on the hyperbole on occasion, but I'm not with this. And even if you have not heard about this race, hopefully by the end of this short story, you'll understand why this race was so important. So 1954 was a huge year for running, and the mile in particular. Roger Bannister had broken the barrier on the 4-minute mile back in May. The man chasing him for the record, albeit on the other side of the world, was John Landy, and he had been the second man to run a sub-4 mile, doing it in June. Landy also had bested Bannister's time, running 3 minutes 57.9 seconds. But they had been running and chasing the same goal on different tracks far from each other. Bannister in England, Landy mostly in Australia. Despite having been the first to run a sub-4 mile and all the accolades that came with it, Bannister felt that he still had something to prove, and that was he needed to run head-to-head with Landy. Now, on this day, the two runners were on the same track in the Commonwealth Games. Athletes from countries that the Brits had colonized and still were listed under the Commonwealth came together. In 1954, the Games were held in Vancouver, Canada. Now, there was one exception that the Games organizers were willing to make for this particular race, and that was an invitation extended to American Wes Santee, who had also been involved in the chase for the sub-4 mile while a student athlete on the track team at Kansas. At this point, though, Santee was in the U.S. Army, and his request to leave to go compete in the Games was denied. At the last minute, he was allowed to provide commentary on a broadcast of the event, but he was always left with the what-if question for the rest of his life. 30,000 people packed into the stadium, with an estimated 10 million watching on television all over the world. And this is 1954. A single television was in only about half of the households at this point. So that's a lot of eyeballs on this race. Of course, there were other track and field events going on, but everybody's interest was on this 1-mile run. And it wasn't just these two lining up against each other. They were running against other participants. But everybody knew that the race was really going to be between Bannister and Landy. Interestingly enough, Landy actually cut his foot the night before. He had been unable to sleep with the anticipation of the race kind of weighing on his mind. And he went out for a walk, and he went walking barefoot, and he stepped on a photographer's shattered flash bulb in the grass. It took about 4 stitches to close up the wound, but it caused him a lot of pain. He never used it as an excuse and actually swore the doctor to secrecy about the injury. There was no consideration of backing out of the race. He knew this was his one chance to prove that he was better than Bannister. Now, both men had a running style. Landy liked to run out front and set the pace. Bannister liked to settle in and then explode in the final 100 with a devastating kick. On the first lap, Landy worked through a little traffic to take the lead between turns 3 and 4, and then he cranked up the speed to a blistering pace. He ran the first quarter mile in 58.1 seconds. At the halfway mark, Landy had about a 10-yard lead. When the bell sounded for the final lap, Bannister had closed the gap and was running on Landy's heels. As they rounded the final turn, Bannister surged past on Landy's right shoulder as Landy looked over his left. It's an iconic image that was captured in a photo that day and has been turned into prints and a bronze statue depicting the precise moment when Bannister wrested control of the race away from the Australian. The Englishman powered home in the final 100 meters to win with a time of 3 minutes, 58.8 seconds, and Landy crossed in 3 minutes, 59.6 seconds. It was the first time that two men had run sub-4-minute miles in the same race. But Bannister had won the mile of the century. He retired from racing later that year to concentrate on his career as a physician. The two men never raced each other again. On this day in 2016, it was Jim Furyk setting a new record for the lowest round in a PGA Tour event. This was the final round of the Travelers Championship at the TPC River Highlands in Connecticut. Furyk, the man with the funky swing, made the turn with a 27, just one off the PGA record of 26 set by Corey Pavin. He had 7 consecutive birdies and was 11 under after 11 holes. He cooled a little bit on the way home, missing 2 short birdie putts on 14 and 15, and the one at 15 actually horseshoed back at him. He wound up with 10 birdies and an eagle on the day. He hit every green in regulation and had an amazingly low 24 putts to shoot a 58. He was actually staring at a 57 on 18, but his birdie putt slid by a few inches on the right. When he tapped in for his par and the lowest round ever recorded in a PGA Tour event, Furyk turned and hugged his caddy, Fluff Cowan, who'd seen a lot of good rounds in his journeys around the links. Furyk's furious rally didn't give him the winner's check, though. He had to shoot a 66 on Friday just to make the cut on the number. A Saturday 73 pushed him into an early tee time on Sunday. His final tally of 11 under was only good for a tie for 5th in the tournament. Now, Furyk is the only player in PGA Tour history to have 2 sub-60 rounds. He shot a 59 3 years before in the 3rd round of the BMW Championship. So prior to being on the bag for Furyk, Fluff caddied for Tiger Woods in his first few years on tour. After Fluff, there was Stevie Williams, who looped for Tiger for most of his iconic wins. But those two parted ways on July 20th, 2011. Williams was caught off guard by the firing and issued a statement about it. He caught on with fellow Australian golfer Adam Scott a few days later, and on this day in 2011, Scott shot a final round 65 to win the Bridgestone Invitational by 4 shots over Luke Donald and Ricky Fowler. As the duo walked up to the 18th green, the crowd was chanting, "Stevie, Stevie." CBS caught up with Steve Williams after the win, with the caddy throwing a little bit of a zinger during the interview, saying, "I've caddied for 33 years, 145 wins, and that's the best win I've ever had." Ouch. Shots fired. Speaking of not being appreciated for years of service, on this day in 1956, Ted Willams was booed by the home crowd at Fenway Park, and he did not take that so well. The Red Sox were hosting the New York Yankees. At this point in the season, Boston was still mathematically in contention, but were 8.5 games behind the first-place Yankees, and things were looking a little bleak. This game went to extra innings, scoreless after 9. In the top of the 11th, with 2 outs, Williams got a late start on a ball hit by Mickey Mantle, and he dropped it. Mantle wound up on second, and he represented the go-ahead run. The capacity crowd of more than 36,000 at Fenway that day started booing Williams. The next batter was Yogi Berra, and he hit a ball to left center. Williams made a spectacular play to record the third out and preserve the tie game. But even after that, as Williams trotted back to the dugout, the boos drowned out the cheers. And those boos were all directed at Williams. As he got close to the dugout steps, Williams reared his head back and he spat towards the crowd. Nothing from the accounts that I read indicate anyone got sprayed, but the intent was clear. And just in case someone did not get the message, Williams came out of the dugout again a few seconds later, and he spat towards the crowd again. The Sox loaded the bases in the bottom of the 11th, and when Williams drew a walk, his second of the day, the winning run trotted home. Boston had won, and it was their 6th win in 7 games. When reporters interviewed the splendid splinter turned splendid spitter about his actions, Williams was unapologetic, saying, quote, "I'm not a bit sorry for what I did. I was right, and I'd spit again at the same fans who booed me today. Some of them are the worst in the world. Nobody's going to stop me from spitting." Red Sox owner Tom Yawkey was in New York that day and had been listening to Mel Allen's Yankee broadcast. When he heard Allen's description of the event and what happened on the field, he called Sox GM Joe Cronin, who fined Williams $5,000 for the spitting incident, which was 5% of his annual salary. Boston would go on to win the next 3 games, but they couldn't gain any more ground on the Yankees, and they finished 4th in the American League. I would imagine the boos they heard on this day weren't the last ones they heard that season. Also on this day, in 1928, Olympic rower Bobby Pearce paused to allow a family of ducks to safely pass before continuing his race. It was the final round of the men's single sculls event, with the Australian Pearce going up against France's Vincent Saurin. Shortly after the start of the 2,000-meter heat race, fans along the canal alerted Pearce about a family of ducks in the water directly in front of his boat. Of course, in rowing, you're facing the opposite way you're going, so he would have never seen the ducks. Pearce slowed down and waited for the ducks to safely pass. Meanwhile, Saurin kept paddling, gaining a substantial lead. But Pearce calmly rowed his way back up to Saurin, caught him at the halfway point, passed him, and beat him by more than 30 seconds to advance to the semifinals, and eventually the finals, where he won the gold medal a few days later. And time now for today's non-sports fun fact. There's an island in the Bahamas that is inhabited only by feral pigs. That's all I've got for you today. Let's do it again tomorrow for another edition of This Day in Sports History. This has been an original Thrive Suite production.
Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, a.k.a. the Football History Dude, and I hope that you enjoyed this recent episode presented by the Sports History Network and were able to learn some good old-fashioned sports history knowledge nuggets. I started the Sports History Network back in 2020 with the mission to help podcasters find a community of like-minded sports history nerds, as well as helping aspiring podcasters to start their own shows. We have a little bit over 30 shows on the network right now covering all sorts of sports history, but as far as I'm concerned, we're just at the toothpick in the ocean moment, that can't even figure it out because there's so much more coming. We wanted to create the ultimate headquarters for sports yesteryear, starting with Podcast Network and our website, but we're going to continue to move into other mediums as well. And here's the cool part, because we want you to be part of our team. So if you're interested in starting your own podcast, or maybe being a guest on one of our shows, or who knows, maybe even writing an article for us over on the website. Seriously, all you gotta do is reach out to us on the contact page over at sportshistorynetwork.com. You can be as technologically savvy as a Neanderthal tapping on a stone trying to figure out this whole hieroglyphics thing back in the day. Again, it doesn't matter, because even if you don't understand the whole podcast space, we have a production team that can pretty much help you out with doing everything. All you gotta do, head over to sportshistorynetwork.com, head to the contact page, fill it out. That message goes right to me, and I'll reach out to you as soon as I can. But for now, dude, I'm through if you're through.